Hello and welcome to the Slumbering Sloth Book Nook, a podcast about all things books, publishing and more. My name is Emma and today my guest is Ana Sampson McLaughlin. Anna is currently Deputy Publicity Director at Quercus Books and has also edited a variety of poetry anthologies, including the well-known She Is Fierce. Now on with the show. Thank you for coming on the podcast today, Anna.
Thank you so much for having me again.
I know, it's so lovely to have you back on to talk about your job this
Wear
time.
a lot of hats.
Yeah, definitely. So first things first, can you tell us about your current role?
Yes, so in my day job, I am job sharing as Deputy Publicity Director of Quercus Books. So I covered the role initially as maternity cover for the Deputy Director, Elizabeth. And when she returned from maternity leave, we now job share the role. So she is there Monday to Wednesday, and I'm there Thursday and Friday. And between us, we are one Deputy Publicity Director for the whole week.
We just all merged into one.
Yes.
Definitely. So kind of what did you say your sort of day-to-day sort of activities are?
Well, publicity is a job where there's all sorts of different things going on all the time. So obviously there's an awful lot of meetings in-house. So we attend editorial meetings where we would be saying, okay, this is the kind of publicity we could get for this book and this author, and this is why we think this would or wouldn't be promotable. So we kind of feed into the process when editors are deciding whether or not to acquire a book. And there might be meetings about planning meetings for books that are coming up, meeting authors for the first time and sort of telling them all the things we're going to do for the publicity for their books, and internal meetings where we look at what's going well, look at what needs to happen, and those kind of things. So there's meetings, obviously, are a part of the day.
Lots of meetings.
Lots of meetings. And other than that, we basically spend our time making sure that people have heard of our books. So we want to get the word out there to people who enjoy reading the kind of books that we're publishing, which in Quercus is a very diverse list, everything from sort of literary fiction to commercial non-fiction. It's a really broad church. We want to get those into the hands of readers who will love them. So we're approaching newspapers and magazines and radio programs and television shows. And obviously, digital and online is an enormous component of what we do now. And that's something that I've seen change over the years I've been in the industry. Yes.
Yeah, wow. I mean, because obviously Quercus is massive, as you said, so there's so much you can do, I guess, with so many different varied types of books. It's not just one sort of subsection, is it?
Absolutely, and I really enjoy that as a publicist. It keeps me on my toes. The place where I worked before, Michael O'Mara Books, was almost exclusively non-fiction, but again, a very broad and diverse list. So at the moment, I'm working on a book called Fair Play, which is about how to rebalance the mental load in your house and marriage, which is, I tell you, catnip for working mums like me. So I'm working on that, but I'm also working on a fantastic book, which is a history book, non-fiction, about the propaganda campaign to bring the Americans into World War II, called Our Man in New York, by a best-selling author, Henry Hemming, which is out quite soon. So that's fantastically exciting. And I'm working on a rediscovered novel by a sort of great of African-American literature who had fallen into great obscurity and whose debut novel we republished last year. And I'm working on his second novel, as well as all kinds of other books, as well as an autobiography by Megan Phelps Roper, who is very well known from the Louis Theroux documentaries about the Westboro Baptist Church. So, I mean, that even just those 4 books that I've mentioned are all completely different titles in totally different areas. So we're targeting different things, different kinds of events, different interviews, different pieces of coverage for all of those. So it keeps us busy and interested.
Yeah, well, as I said, one of the books I actually have read recently, obviously, was The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary, which obviously you guys published. And I want to say congratulations on winning a marketing award for that. That is fantastic.
Yes. Well, that's my amazing colleagues, Hannah and Bethan. And The Flat Share hasn't been one of my campaigns. That's been worked on by our publicity director, my boss, Hannah Robinson, who is a superlative publicist. And that was an exciting book for all of us, really, because it was a huge acquisition. It was a debut. Everyone just totally fell in love with Beth's book and the stories and the characters. And so I feel like everyone in the whole Quercus team was kind of behind that book. It became a real publicity juggernaut.
Oh, it was.
So
It was
I'm
everywhere.
glad. Did you enjoy it?
I loved it. Yeah, because obviously I was like, I want to get on and talk about the flat share because I really loved it. But it was so the way it was marketed was brilliant. So obviously I was like, I need this book now. I like see it in Waterstones. I'm like, I need to get it like right now. I need to
So
go buy
now
the
I
book.
need to turn the question around and say, was there a specific piece of publicity that made you think, yes, I'm in?
The Instagram stuff.
Ah, this is great. Yeah, it's interesting actually because I spoke recently at a careers fair thing, and I was talking to a load of young, mostly women in their early 20s, and I said to them, so where do you find the next book that you're going to read? Because obviously, as publicists, we approach all different kinds of avenues of publicity, and particularly many of the editors are very, very keen on getting national magazines and national newspapers to cover it, reviewing the Guardian, which is incredibly important. But all of these people just looked at me like I was stupid and went, Instagram.
Is this where all the
So
young people go now?
the digital landscape and the digital influencers and the kind of bookstagram community,
Oh
which I
gosh,
am
yeah.
a hugely active part of. I get very obsessed with bookstagram. I love it.
It's a rabbit
Is
hole because once you go down it, you're just like on Instagram for like an hour. Then you're like,
I love it. I started doing it for work. It was important, and I also, because I edit poetry anthologies as Ana Sampson with my other hat on, I kind of wanted to do it to connect with people who might read my books as well as people who might read Quercus's books. Yeah, and I'm just full on addicted now. I just absolutely love it. I'm an Anna Books, Anna with one N, if anyone's listening and wants to come and follow me.
I know,
Ship your
definitely.
books.
Yes, definitely books. No, as I said, Instagram and Twitter have been amazing things when it comes to obviously publicity, and I know we're sort of diving off. It is talking a bit about publicity and what we do and what you do in publicity,
Mm,
because as I said, it's word of mouth. Like you can put
yeah,
as many billboards up of a book or as many ads like or reviews in a newspaper, but ultimately it's word of mouth that you rely on mostly,
yeah.
isn't it, to get the books out? And I think I remember seeing lots of tube ads of like I think the flat share maybe like one or a couple of tube
Mm,
ads when I was in London last time. I think so. I can't remember. I think it definitely was. But it just shows you the power of sort of people just talking to each other
yeah.
about it.
I also think that digital community,
Yeah.
you do learn which people on Instagram have the same taste as you, and there are certain people whose reviews I really trust actually. And if I read something on their feed where they say, "Gosh, I really really love this book," even if it's a book that I might not have looked at, I am much more engaged and much more likely to read it. It definitely I find it completely persuasive. So yeah, it's a hugely important part of what we do. And actually, earlier this year, I had the idea of doing an online buddy read for one of our books called The Night Tiger. So I came up with a hashtag Night Tiger together, and I thought, yeah, we'll do this and we'll kind of read along at the same time. And then, so at Monday night at 8 p.m., we had a discussion on the Quercus Books Instagram feed and Twitter feed, and one of us would, come home in the evening and sit and chat to everyone about the book, and the author came in and chatted to readers about the book as well. And then at the end, they all kind of posted their review. And it was such a brilliant experience because it was fantastic for generating lots and lots of lovely wall posts and lovely stories and lovely sharing and lots of noise about the book, which was great. But I think it also created an army of people who really felt so involved with that book and so involved with the author that they personally had their questions answered, that it just enhanced their reading experience so much they couldn't stop recommending the book to people and getting that kind of word of mouth. So I was really pleased with that as a kind of way that we hadn't really used it before to sort of harness that community. And also, it was just so much fun because everyone's reading at the same time. It becomes this really communal experience, and all of the people who are reading were picking out things that actually I'd missed. when I read the book. So it was really pleasurable to have them go, oh, and do you think this is sort of, is that supposed to stand in for that? And I was like, oh, I hadn't even thought of that. So it really massively enhanced my enjoyment of the reading experience as well. It's like an online book club.
That's so cool. So obviously going back to your job, how do you what skills have you sort of learnt in it, or what do you think are the most important skills for your role?
I think being digitally savvy and active is now. It wasn't when I got into this, when we used to pitch to Amazon for reviews. I mean, there was literally the Waterstones website, and that was it, because I'm very elderly. But I think so. Being digitally savvy, if I was looking to hire an assistant, I would want to see a Twitter handle on there. I would like to see them on Instagram. I would like them to be plugged into that world, because it is a very key part of our job. I'm not saying that you would need to have loads of followers, just that you were there, you
Yeah.
had a presence, that you realised it was kind of something important to the industry. I mean, it's also a very good way of spying on what people are doing in publishing to work out whether what they do might be the bit that you might like to go into.
Yeah.
You might start stalking all these people and think, do you know, I think I might be more interested in marketing, you
Yeah,
see.
definitely not done that at all. At all.
And Twitter is very good for, I think, networking and industry and trade things. And then I think Instagram is very good for communities of readers and finding people who like reading the same things as you. So I would definitely look for kind of digital savvy in that way, and just in the way that I would just expect people to be on social media and be kind of engaging with that. And another thing is being able to be confident and just having an easy manner with people and being able to chat about things, because obviously as a publicist you have to pitch your books, you've got to go and meet quite important people sometimes and tell them why, out of the 400 books a literary editor is sent every single week, they should pick up the book that you're working on and not somebody else's book. So being able to talk fluently and convey your passion, that's important. I mean, and really, really being interested in books, I think, is
Yeah.
the other thing.
Why else would you not go for that role?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Definitely.
mean, publishing is not a particularly well-paid industry. I'm surprising nobody in saying this. And what I do is PR within publishing. And if I wanted to go and do PR for whiskey or shampoo, I could have made a lot more money in my life. But I really love books and I really love publishing. So that's the trade-off.
That's really good, because it's always good to sort of give advice, sort of up and coming people that obviously want to work in sort of publicity. So it's always nice to have a bit of sort of background to how you sort of what you expect to someone to have in that role. So no, that's really good. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. So kind of obviously carrying on with your publishing career, how did you sort of first get into publishing?
Well, it was a long time ago, nearly 20 years ago. And so I was one of the people who benefited very much from the fact that my parents lived quite near London. So I was able to do what was very common for everyone to do until really quite recently, when I'm glad that they are starting to stamp this out now, and do unpaid internships, because I didn't have to up sticks and move to London and, try and find a way to pay rent, while I was working for free, because my parents lived kind of commuting distance from London. So I was able to do that, and that really was the way that most people did it. So I did a couple of work experiences, and initially I thought I wanted to be an editor because I didn't realize there was anything else. And I had a friend who worked in publishing, and she said, "No, you probably ought to be a publicist," because she knew the industry. And I said, "Oh, right, okay, what do they do?" And so I went and did some work experience, and then I got a job sort of covering as a temporary US sales assistant for a bit. And while I was there, somebody showed me the PPC newsletter, the Publishers Publicity Circle. You can't join, I think, unless you're in the industry, but they've got a website with some useful information on it. And the newsletter came round with a job in it, which was a job for a publicity assistant at Random House. So I applied for that and was lucky enough to get that job. And so that was my first foot in the door. I mean, obviously now they are rightly trying to stop the unpaid internships because it's completely unfair. Anyone who doesn't have either independent wealth to be able to move to London and live working for nothing, or parents who live near enough that they can impose on them for long enough to kind of do the unpaid internships and be on that kind of treadmill. It was very difficult for anyone else to get in, and publishing is so London centric, and I think the big publishers are trying to address that now and change that. But 20 years ago, I benefited from that system.
Yeah, of course. Because if you're sort of living outside of London, like me, who lives in Devon, it's quite hard sometimes to keep coming up to London to do a lot of
Absolutely.
work. So
It's
I,
incredibly expensive.
oh gosh, yeah.
I mean, and you might do a 2 week internship and it might not lead to anything. You could do, I know of people who've been doing internships and different internships and grad schemes and these kind of things, and it can go on for a really long time. So it is really, really important that anyone who is interning is being paid some kind of a living wage. And I think most publishers are now addressing that.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, no, I did one like 2 years ago, and it obviously paid, and it was really, really good that, you could sort of get paid every week and you could have some money to pay for like your accommodation or wherever you're staying. So that was really helpful.
Hear that.
Definitely. No, it's great. They said
Yeah.
it's good if you've got someone that lives there, but they said half the time it's really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I completely realized that I had such a head and shoulders advantage over other people getting into the industry that was very unfair. And we do need to diversify the industry, which is something that people are now trying to do more, because otherwise, how can we tell the stories that will reflect the culture that we live in as a whole? If we're all basically people who grew up within the M25, you know, and could afford to do it, just it doesn't make any sense. So I am glad that things are changing now, so that the way that actually I got in probably isn't the way that people will get in the future.
Yeah, I said trains aren't cheap.
Exactly.
It's like 200 quid a return sometimes.
Oof.
Definitely. That's cool. Well, yeah, it's exactly. I mean, always talking about publishing journeys is, it's always quite a good sort of thing to sort of let people know, because I think publishing is definitely one of the most friendliest industries. It's like
I,
everybody's lovely, everyone will talk to you, everybody will take the time. Um, and that's probably why a lot of people want to get into it, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. And I've always found it that way. I've met so many amazing people working in the industry, and I think it's an industry where people have real passion for what they do, which is just wonderful. It's fantastic. We all sit in the office nattering on about books that, aren't necessarily the books that we're working on, because everyone is just kind of excited by the same thing. Um, Too many books, too little time.
Yeah, definitely. I remember doing my first sort of paid work experience. Obviously, it was out of the blue, and it came out. I was like, I'm getting this email at 9 o'clock at night for this work experience that I've just like was randomly. I was like, no, I'm like starting an early shift, and I can't believe it. It's definitely real. And I remember going into this office, and everyone was so lovely, and they would like tea drinkers like me, which was lovely. We were talking about tea for like 20 minutes, which was quite an interesting conversation. Like, it was like a culture of people talking about tea and books. Like, it's the
Yes,
perfect combination. I don't
yes.
know. Yes.
Book, bookish people.
Bookish people seem
Bookish
to get
people are
along
good
like
people.
really well, which is awesome. So yeah, I mean, your job just sounds fascinating. Obviously, I know I talked about publicity quite a lot, and where everything is sort of gone now to digital. But where do you think the industry and publicity are sort of gonna go? Do you think it's gonna go more online, or do you think there's gonna be sort of a different way of advertising books?
Well, advertising is more marketing's area,
Yeah.
so I'm not sure I would make presumptions about that. So, I mean, the rule of thumb is basically if you pay for it, it's marketing, and if you don't, it's publicity.
Right.
But digital, digital has kind of changed that landscape a bit, because obviously a lot of the stuff that we do on Twitter, and Facebook and Instagram and stuff isn't paid for. So there is a kind of blurring of the lines there in the digital landscape. I think I think a few years ago, people worried that the book industry would go the same as the music industry, and books would disappear like CDs. have. And ebooks were going to take over. And I think that has very much been shown not to be the case. But in response to the growth of digital reading, which is great, and I read digitally and I listen to audiobooks and I read paper books, and all of these things to me are reading. I think books have got more beautiful. Books now are I feel like they have become more desirable objects again. There is so much care and attention poured into the design of books and the finishes. And I mean, the binding, for example, the Bridget Collins that came out at the start of this year just looked sensational. I mean,
Yeah, definitely.
the end papers and the sprayed edges and all the bells and whistles. And I think people love books, and they loved them in a way that people didn't love CDs, even though people did love CDs. And so I think we'll see more of making the physical book, a really lustable after. That's ungrammatical, but you know what I mean, a really covetable item, which I'm all for, because I'm an absolute tart for a delicious finish on a book. But I think with publicity, the things that were the big tickets when I started and are still enormous for kind of really boosting sales, things like big events and an interview on BBC Breakfast or a slot on Radio 4 or an interview in a national newspaper, may become not less important, because I think they still have their place. But as more and more people are very digital, as you say, digitally savvy, I think the word of mouth that you can get out there digitally is becoming a real thing that does make people pick up a book.
Exactly, that's great. As you said, because books, I absolutely love collecting books, I have to
I
admit, my
know
bookshelf.
my house is ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't know, when I move next year, it's going to be a bit of a love, sort of having to keep.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think the most book that I got last year I got for Christmas was from our friends, and it was the Penguin Classics book, and I wanted it for ages. And it was how beautiful that it was all like bound and stuff, and I was like,
Mm,
it's so lovely, it's so nice. And they were nice enough, they even wrote a message like in the front for my birthday, and it was so lovely. Like how people used to write in the front of books and stuff, like it
yeah,
was for I was like, I'm so happy, but this has made it even more special. So it's something you can keep on your shelf for a long time.
absolutely. And I think a house without books is weird, and I think a room without books is nude. And there are probably dozens and dozens and dozens of books on my shelves that I'm not going to read again,
Yeah.
but I won't get rid of, because I want them there for my kids to read when they're older. I was lucky enough to grow up in a house where there were lots of books, and the things that I discovered on those bookshelves, you know, taught me so much about life.
Definitely.
And I'm sort of building it partly for my daughters when they're older, so that they can go and I can say, oh, you should read this one. So that in the back of my mind, that's where it is. But also, I just think there's nothing more beautiful than a bookshelf full of books. I mean, and everyone who works in publishing is a massive book fetishist in exactly this way. So
Absolutely,
among friends.
absolutely. Yes, definitely. So the final question is, you probably hear my guests get bamboozled by this question every week because I like to keep people on their toes on the podcast. But what is a book that you have read recently that you would like to recommend? And there's probably going to be lots of them, isn't there?
Oh my goodness, am I allowed to check my Instagram feed for what I have read recently?
Well, up to you if you want.
Now, what have I just read? So I'm halfway through about 10 books at the moment, but I am going to recommend a book. Can I recommend a Quercus book?
Yes, you
Or
can.
is that
Go
cheating?
for it.
Well, I'll recommend one Quercus book and one non-Quercus book. Then
Cover both
that.
sides then.
So the Quercus book I'm going to recommend is coming out next year, 2020. It's called True Story. It's a debut by an American writer called Kate Reed Petty. Remember that name, because this book, it is four sort of different stories, different narratives within the book, each one of them in a very different genre, very different style. What she does is incredibly dazzling and inventive and insane. She tells the story of a purported campus rape where a girl is drunk and she gets driven home by two guys in a car. and she doesn't remember what happened that night. Rumours fly around. The boys tell the police one thing. She has no memory of the night. And it sounds very dark, and it certainly is very challenging and explores kind of issues of consent, which I think is completely crucial questions. But it's also just a ridiculously good read, just really propulsive, entertaining, inventive, so clever. It's all about women's stories, the truth that we're told, the truth that we tell ourselves. It's just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. She's insanely, ridiculously young. She's going to be huge. That's the book you should be reading next year. So there's my pitch for True Story by Kate Reed Petty. But the book that I read recently, which isn't a Quercus book, which is published by Orion, I think it's published by Weidenfeld and Nicholson, which is an imprint of Orion, is The Most Fun We Ever Had by Claire Lombardo, which I just adored. I totally gobbled it up. And it is the story of a couple who have 4 grown-up daughters, and the sort of secrets and lies and the family drama and all the sibling rivalry and the disappointments and the happinesses of their lives. And it's just so emotionally nuanced, so brilliantly pitched, so absorbing. I just adored it. So I will now read everything that she ever writes forever.
That's great. Thank you so
Claire
much.
Lombardo, The Most Fun We Ever Had.
I definitely will pick that up.
Well, it's in hardback at the moment, so you might want to wait for the paperback because it's quite heavy.
Okay, I will definitely have that, because if I'm carrying that around, then it's going to be really, really, really heavy. No, that's a good recommendation. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much for talking to me. I love talking about publicity and publishing.
Good, that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. You can follow Anna on Twitter at Anna Books. If you'd like to get involved with the podcast, you can get in touch through Twitter at novelm16 and use the hashtag Slothcast, or you can send me an email at slumberyslothbooknook@gmail.com. You can also find our podcast on our YouTube channel, Slumbery Sloth Book Nook, or download from Podbean and Apple Podcasts from On The Go Experience. See you next week. Bye.